In the latest escalation of tensions in the Western Hemisphere, U.S. President Donald Trump has issued a stark warning to Cuba, saying Havana will no longer receive oil or financial support unless it strikes a deal with the United States before it's too late. On social media platform Truth Social, President Trump declared that there will be zero oil or money going to Cuba, a direct reference to Havana's decades-long reliance on support from Venezuela. Trump wrote that Cuba lived for many years on large amounts of oil and money from Venezuela, and that in return it provided what he described as security services for Caracas. He added that this arrangement has now ended and urged Cuban authorities to reach an agreement with the United States before it is too late. The warning arrives in the wake of an unprecedented U.S. military operation in Venezuela, in which Americans captured President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. That operation has reshaped regional dynamics and significantly squeezed Cuba's economic lifeline. Cuba's economy has been heavily dependent on subsidized Venezuelan oil for years, especially as part of bilateral agreements dating back to the era of Hugo Chavez. With that support now effectively cut off, analysts warn Havana could face intensified economic strain. In addition to the oil and financial ultimatum, President Trump also reshared a social media post joking that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio could one day be president of Cuba, adding, "Sounds good to me." While that comment is widely seen as rhetorical posturing rather than official policy, it underscores growing U.S. pressure on the island. Cuban officials have condemned U.S. statements, denouncing them as interference and a threat to their sovereignty. Havana's leadership portrays the situation as part of a broader campaign aimed at destabilizing the Cuban government. This development marks one of the most serious diplomatic confrontations between Washington and Havana in decades and could result in toppling of yet another Latin American government.
Well, Cuba's in bad shape. Cuba relied on Venezuela for oil and for money, and nobody really knows what's going to happen with Cuba. They're doing very poorly. They're really third world all the way, and we have a lot of great Cuban Americans. And I would say Marco fits very solidly into that category. And I might ask you to say a few words about, we were discussing it before, Cuba is a very different, they don't have energy, they don't have oil, but they would live off of the oil from Venezuela. And what they do have is very strong people and very powerful people militarily, and they would protect the people running Venezuela, and they would take in a lot of money from Venezuela. Now they don't have that. They won't be taking in any money. So, Marco, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the fundamental problem in Cuba is that it's run by incompetent people that don't know what an economy looks like, much less a functioning one. They've made a choice, and that is they would rather have political control over their people than they would to have an economy that functions. And they've gotten away with it for 60-something years because they've had donors, the Soviet Union, and now most recently Venezuela. But that's now gone. So the people in control in Cuba have a choice to make. They can either have a real country with a real economy where their people can prosper, or they can continue with their failing dictatorship that's going to lead to systemic and societal collapse. So it's a very stark and dramatic choice, and it's one we hope to make the right one. We don't have an interest in a destabilized Cuba, but that would be their fault because they refuse to allow the people of Cuba to have either economic or political freedom for that matter.
And you have a lot of people in this country that want to go back to Cuba and help Cuba. A lot of people have left, they came in penniless, they didn't have anything, and they've become very rich people in our country, and they want to very much go back and help Cuba. So that's something that Cuba has that a lot of other places don't have. Peter?
Several oil tankers that quietly departed Venezuela earlier this month with their tracking systems switched off have now returned to the country's waters, according to state oil company PDVSA and vessel monitoring services. At least 4 of the ships, most of them carrying crude, had left Venezuelan ports in early January operating in so-called dark mode, a tactic used to avoid detection amid a strict maritime blockade imposed by the United States. Their return highlights the growing strain on Venezuela's oil exports under the embargo, which has sharply reduced shipments to minimal levels. Monitoring data showed that a flotilla of around a dozen crude-laden tankers, along with at least 3 empty vessels, sailed out of Venezuelan waters last month in what appeared to be an open challenge to the U.S. restrictions introduced in mid-December by President Donald Trump. Those measures intensified pressure on Caracas and disrupted shipping routes, forcing many vessels to turn off their transponders to evade interception. However, the effort met mixed results, with several ships either stopped or compelled to reverse course. One of the most significant incidents involved the Panama-flagged supertanker M. Sofia, which was intercepted and seized by U.S. authorities this week while attempting to return to Venezuela. Another vessel, the Aframax tanker Olina, sailing under the flag of Sao Tome and Principe, was also intercepted but later released and allowed to head back to Venezuelan waters, according to PDVSA. U.S. officials had earlier confirmed that Olina, previously known as Minerva M, would be freed. Satellite imagery reviewed by TankerTrackers.com later confirmed that 3 additional tankers from the same group, the Panama-flagged Merope, Cook Islands-flagged Min Hang, and Panama-flagged Thalia 3, were spotted back in Venezuelan waters late Friday. The monitoring service said all the vessels identified as having departed earlier were operating under U.S. sanctions at the time. A separate group of sanctioned ships was also observed leaving Venezuelan ports empty after completing domestic transport or unloading imported cargo. These maritime movements come as Venezuela remains under strict U.S. supervision following the capture and extraction of President Nicolas Maduro last week. U.S. authorities indicated that the next phase could involve a return to structured oil exports as part of a proposed $2 billion crude supply agreement currently being negotiated between Caracas and Washington. President Trump told senior oil executives on Friday that discussions on the supply arrangement had advanced. Meanwhile, major trading firms, Vitol and Trafigura, have received the first U.S. licenses allowing them to negotiate and transport Venezuelan crude, sources said. Supplies of naphtha to the OPEC member are also expected. Images additionally showed the tanker Nord Star refueling at Venezuela's Bajo Grande port earlier this month, underscoring continued logistical activity even as sanctions enforcement tightens.
They were trying to be there. I mean, you know, we had a Russia, I guess sort of I call it a semi-Russian ship yesterday that we took over, and Russia decided not to defend that ship against us. It's a big movement. The ship was loaded up with oil, and we took the oil, and it came out of that port. But Russia would be there or China would be there.
How does the administration plan to distribute the money from the Venezuela oil sales? Is it, obviously you say it's going to go into these controlled accounts.
Yeah.
Would it go back to Venezuela in a direct payment? Is it going through these goods? How do you plan to do that?
Well, we want to make sure that Venezuela can survive. You know, Venezuela needs money, and we're going to make sure that they get money, and we're going to get money, and the oil companies are going to make something for the work they do, and they're going to get back their money. We're devising a formula, but it won't be so much of a formula. It's going to be what they need. We're going to take care of what they need. There'll be plenty left over. We're going to have a lot of money left over. And the money left over is going to the United States of America, and the oil companies are going to be very happy. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Mr. My second question is, would the administration offer a backstop to these oil companies for like financial guarantees, some sort of backstop, if the country did destabilize again?
That's a very interesting question. Using the word backstop, I haven't heard that word in a long time. That was at the Wharton School of Finance I last heard. That's a good term. We ought to use it more often. I hope I don't have to give a backstop. Look, these are very smart people, the smartest people. They're not only in oil and business. These are the biggest companies in the world sitting around this table. They know the risks. I mean, there are risks. We're going to help them out. We're going to make it real easy. They're going to be there for a long time. We're going to be there together for a long, long time. And they're going to be taking the oil, and they're going to be bringing oil prices down. They're going to make a lot of money. They're going to get their money back. They're going to be safe. The people of Venezuela are going to be big beneficiaries, and the United States of America is going to be a big beneficiary for what we've done. And you know, one other thing I might say, it's also very big for national security because, again, just like Greenland, we can't have China or Russia occupy Greenland. We can't have China or Russia occupy Venezuela. And if we didn't do what we did, China or Russia would have been in Venezuela. I think I can, where's Mr. Chevron? So let me ask you, they would have been there if we didn't do this. Do you agree with that?
They certainly have a lot of economic interests in country. There's absolutely no argument about that.
They were trying to be there. I mean, you know, we had a Russia, I guess sort of I call it a semi-Russian ship yesterday that we took over, and Russia decided not to defend that ship against us. It's a big movement. The ship was loaded up with oil, and we took the oil, and it came out of that port. But Russia would be there or China would be there. And we want them to be there for a different reason. We want them, do you people agree? In particular, China, they need a lot of oil. Russia doesn't need so much, but Russia was there anyway. But I assume you agree that China would like to be doing a lot of business there by buying oil. And I want to just tell President Xi and President Putin, but more so in this case, President Xi, because they do need a lot of oil. And we are open for business in the United States, and we are open for business in Venezuela.
The United States has struck again at sea. Another oil tanker has been seized in the Caribbean, this time the Olena, in a bold pre-dawn operation that underscores Washington's tightening grip on Venezuela's oil lifeline. According to U.S. officials cited by Reuters, the tanker was intercepted near Trinidad on Friday by the U.S. Coast Guard and Joint Task Force Southern Spear after sailing under a false flag. The vessel had been masquerading as registered in Timor-Leste, a move U.S. authorities say was designed to evade detection. Marines and sailors launched from the USS Gerald R. Ford, surrounding and boarding the tanker without incident. U.S. Southern Command declared the message unmistakable: there is no safe haven for criminals. Maritime risk analysts say the Olena's tracking system had gone dark more than 50 days ago inside Venezuelan waters, classic behavior of what Washington calls the ghost fleet. The tanker reportedly left Venezuela last week fully loaded with oil, part of a flotilla that departed shortly after the dramatic capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The Olena was not new to U.S. radar. It previously sailed under the name Minerva M, a vessel sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury last year for transporting Venezuelan oil in defiance of sanctions. This seizure marks America's fifth tanker interception as the Trump administration enforces a maritime blockade aimed at strangling the regime's energy revenues. U.S. officials say the goal is pressure, not war, using control of oil, money, and shipping lanes as leverage. The move comes just hours after Washington released Russian crew members from another seized tanker, signaling that this is not a random campaign, but a calculated one. Vice President J.D. Vance summed it up bluntly: control the oil, control the regime. President Trump now says Venezuela has agreed to ship tens of millions of barrels of oil to the U.S. and cooperate on rebuilding its energy sector, conditions that led him to halt plans for further military action. At sea, the message is clear: America is enforcing the rules, tanker by tanker.